Hello and welcome to the AIM North America webinar on smarter food safety. AIM North America is the global industry alliance for stakeholders of barcoding, RFID, and other automatic identification and data capture technologies. Our stakeholders include manufacturers, software vendors, distributors, integrators, resellers, governments, and end users across all industries who depend on accurate, available, and identifiable data. AIM creates standards, promotes community, advocates, and educates. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items I would like to go over. First is our antitrust policy. It's the policy of AIM Inc. to conduct its operations in strict compliance with the antitrust laws. No AIM activity shall create even the appearance of a violation of the letter or spirit of the antitrust laws. Next, we have AIM North America's collaboration and work product policy. This states that presentations like today's are held for the primary purpose of advancements in our industry, which necessarily involves development of work product intended solely for the public domain. AIM's developed this policy for the protection of its members who engage in this important collaborative effort. And lastly, before we get started, attendees are muted throughout the presentation. If you have a question, our presenter will be answering some of those at the end of the presentation, so please stay on mute throughout the presentation. You can also ask questions by chatting those to AIM member services. You will also be notified when this presentation recording is available. Today I'm here with John DiPalo, who is Chief Strategy Officer of ACSIS. He will be discussing the practical considerations for building a cloud-based food traceability architecture. John, take it away.
Thank you, Mike. So first, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And first, I wanted to thank everybody for joining today. This is an exciting topic on the new, guidelines and reports coming out from the FDA on food traceability. And what I want to talk today about is really how can we think about building out a reference architecture that companies can use to share information, to capture information about products moving through their supply chain, and to be able to disseminate that information, in the event of a recall, in the event of an adverse supply chain event, or just to be able to provide their customers and stakeholders with more information about the products as it moves through their supply chain. Just real quick, and I promise not to spend more than a minute on this one, but just a little bit about who we are and what we do as a company. So ACSIS is a 25-year-old supply chain visibility and traceability company serving the Fortune 1000, building out personalized cloud-based supply chain track and trace solutions. And we've done that for various industries, including chemical, life sciences, food and beverage, and what we call industrial manufacturing. And the reason I think that those different industries are important, as those of you on the webinar today will agree, is in order to build a robust traceability solution, it makes perfect sense to bring the best parts of all of those different industries' experience together and gather the learnings and best practices done over time, from things around the serialization initiatives in pharmaceutical to, things like, MSDS tracking for the chemical industry and for the farm to fork initiatives that we've seen across food and beverage. And as we look towards the future and being able to bring all of those different experiences and all those different ways of capturing and disseminating information together, I think that the time now is correct from both a technology perspective as well as from a requirements perspective to think about what the next era of food safety and building out what we're calling the reference architecture for a new era in the food supply chain. So one of the genesises for this discussion, and just to kind of give everyone a little bit of a flavor for how I'm going to do today, these AIM webinars, what we're going to try and do is keep, my portion to 20 to 30 minutes tops, have some time for questions and discussion and give everyone back a little bit of time in their day. And there'll be certainly follow-on items and follow-on discussions that I think we'll be able to generate out of the webinar and the presentation and the questions that we get from today. So recently, the FDA put out their blueprint for the new era of smarter food safety. And I wanted to highlight really the 4 core elements of what this blueprint is talking about, because I think it is a fantastic document. If you haven't had the opportunity to review it, I suggest that you do. I think there's some really, really good information in there. There's some really good thoughts around what the future of food safety is going to look like. And I have a link to the document that I will include in this presentation at the end, so that you can go onto the FDA website and take a look at it. But really, what I've done, and there's a lot behind this document, so by no means is this discussion today going to cover, near the complete breadth of what is in the document and what is talked about. But what they really talk about as you think about building out how we're going to share information, how we're going to respond to things, how new business models may work within food safety, and how we can get the consumer engaged, is they've really built out 4 core elements within this blueprint. And the first element is really starting to leverage new tech and existing tech and its capability to allow us to have a better handle on traceability throughout the food chain and the food supply chain. Now that includes a number of different things, and I tried to draw out some of the some of the broader points out of the report when we take a look at the 4 core elements. But as always, as we talk, at AIM Global around, being able to leverage existing standards and extend standards so that people can talk in a common vocabulary. Obviously, that is a very, very important part of being able to communicate, the traceability events, but also being able to look across the food supply chain and come up with a common vocabulary of common events and data that we want to be able to capture in order to share movements, in order to share events, in order to share different things that are happening within the supply chain. So building out that tech-enabled traceability, is key in kind of the pillar 1 of the core elements. And I'm going to go into more detail around my thoughts of how companies and stakeholders in the industry should look at those types of things. The other thing, the second core tenet, is really building out smarter tools for prevention and outbreak response. So if I do have a recall, if I have an adverse supply chain event, if I have supply issues, and obviously, and I'm not going to make this a COVID-19 focused webinar. I think we've all seen enough of those, but we are seeing the impacts of supply outages and the impact on the supply chain from that as well. But again, being able to, if there is an event, if there is a recall, if there is something that you need to notify stakeholders or consumers, is, how can we put in our toolbox a smarter set of tools for not only the prevention of issues before they happen, but once something happens, how can I consistently get information out in a common way out into my stakeholders' geographies in order to report that there's an event or something that somebody needs to take advantage or understand. The other area is how do I look at new business models? This one I think is very much topical today, right? Retail modernization and new business models. Who thought even 6 months ago that the level of home delivery, the level of different ways that we get our food delivered to our house, or the food travels through the supply chain, would be being done so in the way that it is today. So we have all of these new ways of moving product and these new ways of delivering product that are advancing at a very rapid rate. And I think one of the challenges that we see is, are we keeping up from a technology perspective so that we can monitor that new delivery process or that new product movement process or that redistribution of manufacturing is monitored in a proper way to mitigate any risk factors. And then the other thing with this new business model, and it really also talks about the fourth pillar, is how can we educate consumers on how you may have to handle things differently. Do you have to manage your day or manage deliveries in a different way, manage when product is coming into the house, maybe have a better understanding of how long it's been on that delivery truck or what its journey has been, so that I can really understand the status of product or food or other items that are being delivered to my house, so that I make sure that they're safe and they're still within their tolerances. And again, leveraging both business models as well as technology to support that, is going to become ever more important, with these new business models. Because even, as we come out the other side of this current crisis, which I all know that we hope is soon, there's still going to be a lot of people that want to keep things, from a delivery perspective, keep things from a shopping perspective the way that they are, because there is some convenience to that. So, we need to think about how we can build in that automation and that track and trace capability to ensure safety. And then, the fourth core element of the blueprint is really how do we continue to build out what they call a food safety culture. And that is really where we want to develop strategies around being able to push information out to consumers or allow them to quickly pull information about the products that they're buying through the use of mobile technology, through the use of push notifications, through the use of various ways of interacting with customers that not only give them the ability to control food safety, but also I think allow that to drive into value for the companies that are providing this new business model and modernizing their supply chain and allowing their customers to become much more collaborative with them. So, if we look at these four core elements, they really make sense to me, as not only focused towards food safety and focused towards being able to have a better understanding of where things are within the supply chain, but also from a business perspective, when we look at the stakeholders, in food manufacturing, food packaging, and food delivery, if you start to think about how they can utilize this new tech-enabled traceability to drive, better revenue and better profit for them in this new world that we're living in, I think it's a very complementary way of looking at the world. So, this report and this process that we're going through, I think is very topical for today's times. I want to switch gears just a little bit, and talk about, if we look at this from, kind of what I call a persona basis, right? So, how can, different stakeholders within the supply chain look at the new availability or what could be the new availability of information and data and be able to take advantage of that, right? So if I look at it as an example from a risk management perspective, where are the food products in my supply chain? Do I have raw materials that I'm sourcing from different areas of the country, that may either have an issue or I need to have a better provenance of where those raw materials came from? And how can I start to leverage, the new industrial IoT capability that's coming online to be able to understand how to better source product, how to better control that product during the sourcing. From a risk management perspective, and this is a big one, obviously, is if I do have a recall, not only how can I get the information out that there's a recall, but I think one of the tenets that we also should think about is how do I manage the effectiveness of that recall? So, utilizing technology and utilizing, bigger data sets, can I better understand where I may need to put more emphasis in one area of the country or another, based on a national recall of a particular product or something along those lines? And then from a, from an ROI and from a business perspective, one of the things that we hear when we talk to some of our food customers is, being able to do a successful compliance audit, is a timely, labor-intensive process. And how can I start to streamline those so that, I know that I'll be successful, that I can do mock recalls quickly, that I can do compliance audits, as automatically as possible. And again, by leveraging the ability to track product from end to end, I think we really start to build out that process. If we look at it from a supply chain view, it's a different set of challenges, but often can be solved by the same set of information, right? So, how can I ensure that the level of inventory that I have, at distributor sites or at third-party warehouses, support the demand that I'm seeing, in the supply chain? An example, again, that we see today is just trying to move different product to different areas of the country based upon demand, in a manner so that we can successfully support customer bases, in different areas. So, the other areas that on the supply chain side, is, do I have diversion? Do I have gray market? Is everything that is running through my supply chain what I say it is, right? Again, just like the risk manager, if I'm a supply chain manager, I need to be able to quickly understand how to react to a supply chain disruption, either on the supply chain side, or again, if I have a recall or an adverse supply chain event that I need to react to. And then from a cost perspective, and we see this especially, as we talk around perishable foods and things like that, how can I really manage my inventory to limit waste, to manage safety stock levels, to manage, expiration and those types of things in a more controlled way. And then towards that consumer focused area, I think we're starting to see more and more, consumers really wanted to understand, where does my food come from? Am I buying food that, is sustainably farmed, as an example, is humanely farmed? Can I get additional information on how to properly store and prepare my food, especially now, with this, this delivery culture that we're in? How am I sure that the food that I'm receiving, has actually been stored and processed properly? And then, can I quickly identify from the product at the product level whether or not something has been recalled or there's, some action I need to take? So the information, that we talk about, and that is referenced as an example in the FDA report, can be repurposed for all of these different personas. And there are others. This is by no means a comprehensive list of, the food supply chain persona, but I just wanted, people to start to think about, if I put in, an architecture for food safety and for traceability, how can I leverage that in different ways? Because we fully understand as a service provider and a solutions provider that, there is a ROI that's required in order to think about, creating these types of systems, and certainly regulatory drivers, drive system implementations and things like that. But the best solutions are those that are, paid for, by a return on investment from a business perspective, in addition to satisfying a regulatory requirement. And the challenge that we see is often the people who have to budget for the solution aren't necessarily those that accrue the most value from it. So when we think about how do I put a solution in, I just like to think about how can I get, consensus across an organization in order to help build out the best possible solution. With that thought, I want to just think about a couple of points, in kind of the new world order of IoT and cloud computing and big data and analytics and all of those different buzzwords that we're hearing in the space today, and start to put together, some thoughts around what a reference architecture could be for the new, food safety supply chain. And, quite honestly, a lot of the pieces that you see, as we go through this are, being used by different industries today in different capacities. And as I said earlier, I think the best solutions are those that bring in the best practices from different industries and really give you, kind of a best practice approach towards track and trace. And, a lot of the big things that we're seeing changing very rapidly today is really data collection on the edge, and being able to, at a relatively low cost, be able to build out a framework of different data collection components across, raw material processing, could be farm to fork, it could be initial raw material processing, but a whole series of different data collection methods, which includes barcode, includes vision systems, includes RFID, includes low energy Bluetooth and other industrial IoT technologies, and being able to build that in a edge loose computing capability that allows you to have, store and forward capability built in, allows you to get information from multiple stakeholders, utilizing this edge computing capability. And what we're seeing in that space is the technology components of that continue to improve while the cost continues to go down. So what used to be prohibitively expensive to put in place is not so much the normal course of action anymore. And I think we'll continue to see that downward pressure from a pricing perspective, especially in the areas of auto identification, including RFID, and obviously Bluetooth and other beaconing technologies, that may be utilized at a different level of granularity. Now, when we think about what we do with that information, one key that I think is vitally important is the edge must be meaningfully connected to the ERP systems, right? And in a horizontal supply chain where you have a lot of stakeholders, typically you'll have one or two what I call dominant partners who manage the transactional business processes of the order to cash process. And one of the disconnects that we have seen in the past is that things that are going on, at the edge, at the shop floor, in packaging, in distribution, are not connected in an automated way to the ERP. They're connected more in a manual way. And that is where you start to get this information disconnect, and the cost of getting that information into your ERP system continues to go up. And that is where we start to see the inability of getting very high fidelity granular data into systems that need it in order to then be able to drive what I believe to be the next two layers that we're going to see an explosion of use in, and that is truly robust tracking applications that allow you to track product in real time or near real time as they move through your supply chain, but those must be driven by events that are happening at the edge and have business context around them. We often see, systems that are put in for tracking that don't have a connection to their business systems in a meaningful way. And the challenge with that is, if you do detect an anomaly or an adverse supply chain event, by the time you link all the pieces together, it may be too late to take effective action. So that's why we see this as a connected stack, starting at the edge, going through your ERP or MES or other shop floor control systems, building out these tracking applications. And then ultimately, on top of that, we're going to start to see, a very robust, very big use of what predictive analytics and machine learning, and ultimately artificial intelligence, which is going to be able to take a look at all this information and start to make decisions around alerts and management of processes and movement of shipments and all those types of things, as we start to get the data sets that will support that. Now, where I think we are, and there certainly will be those who disagree with me, is we're starting to see viable use of machine learning algorithms to do those types of things. I think we're still a little bit far away from true artificial intelligence making those types of decisions for us. But as the algorithms get smarter, as the data set gets richer, and as we start to add more context to that, we really are going to start to see this automation of information being able to be disseminated out into the greater supply chain. So when we look at it from a traceability perspective, and we look at it from a stakeholder perspective, I think you really have to look at it both on the order to cash process, right? So how am I managing suppliers? How am I managing, production or manufacturing? How am I managing my distribution? And then ultimately, how do I apply a robust track and trace overlay on top of that? Because we have all of these different stakeholders involved in the process, and the goal really is for us at the far right hand of the spectrum here, where you have that consumer verification, icon that I have in there, is for them to really be able to say, okay, I'm going to scan something, I'm going to take a picture of a QR code, I'm going to be at checkout, and through a Digimark, it's going to automatically check the status of product as I'm checking out of the grocery store, as an example. Be able to go back through all of those different processes and understand, what is the safety of the product that I'm buying? Should it be sold? Should it be sold in this geography? There's all kinds of additional things that once we get these pieces tied together, you really can start to get a lot of additional value out of. And then if you look at it from the supply chain side of the house, having that supply chain visibility to start to really squeeze out all of the inefficiencies that we have in the, in the current supply chain by having data associated with those products as they move through the supply chain, I think really allows, from a ROI and from a value perspective, companies to really start to look at their supply chains in a different way. Now, having said that, I fully understand this is not something that happens overnight. This is not something that happens, in a very quick manner without investment and making it happen. But what, I like to think about as you start to think of what a reference architecture can be for, supply chain traceability, for food safety, and quite honestly, other industries, is, how do you sit back and think about a track and trace solution where you can dynamically add attributes and context data at the item level, at the case level, at the saleable unit level, whatever level of granularity makes sense to your business, and support that visibility, across the extended supply chain. So this concept of what I call flexible context data, and being able to, based upon the product, based upon, its life cycle, based upon what it is, being able to add these additional pieces of context data at different stakeholder points throughout the distribution process or throughout the supply chain process is key. And then the other piece is, how can I share that information, with the stakeholders appropriately for who they are, right? Because obviously what a manufacturer needs to see is going to be different than potentially what a distributor needs to see, which again will be different from what an end consumer needs to see. So, as we think about these solutions, and as we think about being able to identify product at the proper level, right? So being able, to uniquely identify or serialize product and then attach these attributes to it, become key. And again, from a technology perspective, with the advent of cloud computing, with the advent of big data storage, we're no longer as limited as we were in carrying this level of attribute data as it's associated with a product, just because we have, completely new ways of managing information. And I think it doesn't all have to happen tomorrow, but as you think about how we're going to build these things out, those keys really become quite important. And, the other thing, which, I don't have a specific slide for, and I probably should have put one together because it's a very important point. And, the challenge that I think we need to think about is, how do we share information, right? And how do we get information, on products, and how do we get information shared across different businesses and different consumers of information? And, this concept of a multimodal approach to being able to share information and having, a product identified potentially via a barcode, as well as an RFID tag, as well as a QR code, just as an example, so that the person who needs to get information about that product is not limited to a way that they can't access it. And you know, that what I call that multimodal approach of managing information, I think is just as key, because if we have a barrier to how we share information or how we gather information, the success of any particular solution, you know, kind of starts to drop off to the people who have a way of doing things as opposed to multiple ways. And, you know, I point out the same thing for supplier integration or partner integration is, you know, not everybody can deal with EDI transactions, just as an example. You know, so how do we open up our solutions to allow multiple ways of sharing information, which ultimately coalesce to the standards that we all want to use, so the vocabulary is the same and the processing is the same, but the data sharing method, you know, can be flexible. So I put that out there. You know, I do have, you know, from a kind of a learning slide and a key takeaway slide, you know, there are certainly, you know, a lot more key takeaways of this report than are in this slide. We could have, you know, probably had 10 slides of takeaways, you know, as we take a look at the report. The link to the blueprint is here on the slide, but, you know, I think the bigger points or the thoughts that, you know, I like to lead with, you know, when we talk about items like this is, you know, understanding, you know, the ecosystem of your supply chain. Everyone's different. Every supply chain's a little, you know, a little bit different and has little unique nuances to it. And how far can you extend that digital transformation to gather that information? And back to the point I made before is, how can your partners participate? So that is key. You know, getting an 80% participation, you know, from big players, but not being able to get the last 20% still leaves you with a big hole in processing and being able to gather the information necessary. So, you know, how do we get to 95%? How do we get to 98% participation? You know, as I mentioned earlier, you know, how do I do and think about a multimodal approach for identification? You know, we are in a brave new world of, you know, the ability to share information, the ability for people to take their mobile phones out and utilize QR codes or other technology to gather information. You know, near field, you know, NFC, RFID is in play, as well as QR codes, as barcodes, and all kinds of other ways of identifying information. And I think we have to think about leveraging, you know, multiple ways and that multimodal approach so that everyone can participate. You know, the one that's very near and dear to me from a functionality standpoint is the system extensibility from a data perspective. You know, no one can tell what tomorrow's data requirements are going to be. No one can tell what new pieces of information might be required in order to support, you know, the tracking of product. So building an extensible solution that allows you to add additional context data to your systems, store that, and again, marry that up with business data within your ERP systems, you know, is going to be key for a solution that can evolve over time. You know, one of the interesting points, which I thought was well talked about in the report, is, you know, how do you have a standard root cause analysis methodology in the event of an issue, right? Can you say, okay, we had an issue, you know, here's our constant approach, a consistent, repeatable way of doing things, a consistent and repeatable way of sharing information, you know, in the event of a recall or supply chain issue, so that people, you know, kind of in the world and customers, you know, when they see an event, it's shown the same way, it feels the same way, it has the same level of information, it has the way to remediate it. And, you know, I think that capability of sharing consistent information, you know, is very helpful. And then, you know, this multi-channel approach for communication, you know, with suppliers, you know, partners and customers, and being able to leverage, you know, the electronic delivery of information, you know, and also leveraging those same channels for customer collaboration and customer loyalty and getting more information, out to customers as it relates to not only things that can go wrong, in the food supply chain, but how can I get better value? How can I get more customer loyalty? How can I drive a direct channel communication with my customers? I think we're just at the very beginning of how we do that. And, I think this blueprint really starts to build out a path for companies to have a much more collaborative relationship with their customers, as well as the ability to, get more visibility and insight into what's going on, within the supply chain. And again, looking back to leverage, existing architectures that are across different industries, taking kind of the best parts of those and looking at how we can apply that lens to the, to the food safety area that we're in now. The blueprint URL is here at the bottom of the page. I would recommend, if you haven't taken a look at the document, you do. It's very well done. And as promised, we kept it to a good 30 minutes here of my discussion. I don't know if any questions had come in, during the presentation, but if anyone has any, please feel free to hit us up in the chat, or if there's more information that you would like to get, there's a couple of different venues. I'm always available, via email. There's the info page at AIM North America, and we're happy to have any discussion or questions that came up during the presentation.
All right, thank you, John. Appreciate the information you gave us here today, and we do have a few questions that I'll get to just momentarily. If you have a question you want to ask John, just send that via the chat option at the bottom of your screen. You'll send that to AIM's member services, and I can ask those. But if you're ready, John, I'll ask you some of these questions.
Sure, as long as they're not too hard, it's
okay. Well, the first one we have is, will the FDA be monitoring that companies are utilizing the blueprint? If so, do you know how?
That's an excellent question. I don't have the kind of monitoring and enforcement piece. Haven't gotten through that yet. Happy to do a little bit more research on that one, and and maybe we can have a follow-up 15-minute on enforcement and kind of what that looks like from the FDA's perspective.
Okay, great. Another question we have. With everything that's been going on in the world, have you seen an increase in interest in traceability implementation? If so, has it been in certain markets or just all over?
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually have seen a significant uptick in, it's interesting because we track and trace and supply chain traceability as keywords, even for searches and things like that. And there's been a significant uptick in traceability, track and trace, supply chain traceability, in areas that people didn't even, really give a second thought before, are becoming huge discussion points that we're seeing in different areas, right? So certainly we're seeing it in, grocery as an example. We're seeing it obviously in food and beverage, and in chemical. Right. And, the whole traceability discussion, I think certainly that, in COVID has driven a lot of that. We started to see that before, 2020 as an uptick in traceability, just because I think the technology has matured to the point where it makes sense to do that. But certainly now we have seen a huge uptick in that. And I think the other thing that is driving that is supply chain sourcing risk. And people have really understood the fact that they may have been diversified from a supply chain sourcing perspective. However, there's still a lot of challenges in understanding in different geographies, how product is being sourced and its availability. And, when things turn very quickly, as they're doing now, huge disruptions result. And we still have a lot of kind of black holes and blind spots in our supply chain. And I think that companies are looking to fill those now.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question we have is, have you seen or heard of issues basically getting all the parties to be interoperable, basically like shipper, supplier, consumer, and who in the supply chain takes the lead in these implementations?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think we have that conversation with everyone that we talk to. Unfortunately, there's no silver bullet answer for that. When I think about that question, there's always kind of what I call a dominant partner, kind of in a supply chain, right? And that's the party who is either controlling the brand or controlling the major product or what have you. And I think what we're starting to see now, and we've seen it before and we're starting to see it more now, is that companies are starting to think about how can I work more collaboratively so that benefit accrues to both partners, right? So in the event of manufacturers shipping to a distributor, a distributor who provides better participation with their manufacturer, as an example, may be offered better terms or better allocation of a hot product or something along those lines, or automatic reordering, so that if I share information back to my manufacturing partner, as an example, I can cut down on my ordering costs. I can get better visibility of inbound product, things of that nature. We're starting to see the same on the supplier side. Part of the challenge I think that many companies have is they don't have a diverse way of doing information sharing as well. To either receive demand or put demand out, into the field. Or get demand from a multi-layer supply chain, or get events from a multi-layer supply chain. Technology is going to help solve some of those issues, and I think we'll start to see more collaborative business models crop up from that. I'm not saying it's going to be a panacea, because you're always going to have a level of tension between manufacturers and distributors and end distributors and things like that, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I think as supply chains, become even more complex, that level of collaboration between manufacturer, distributor, supplier is going to be key for those who are going to be successful in retaining customers and being able to service their customers. And then on the flip side of that, and I apologize for the long answer on this one, but I think it's very topical, is the more information that you can provide your customer and make it easy for them to gather that information, especially in this era of mobile, the more process of customer retention, the higher customer satisfaction you're going to have. And then the ability to drive that customer interaction potentially all the way back to the manufacturer, and maybe even skip over some of those partners in the supply chain who may not want to participate, is a key change in the supply chain that we're seeing, and may evolve into many new distribution models that I think are going to become very interesting over the short term.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question we received is, tracking tainted ingredients through the supply chain is often key to identifying products that need to be recalled. Do you have any thoughts on the issues involved and how that can be achieved?
A bit of, and I've done a few of these projects, kind of in the pharmaceutical industry around jurisdictional control and not necessarily tainted products, but products that need to come from certain jurisdictions to be delivered in other jurisdictions, right? And you can look at tainted, or you can look at potentially product that gets tested and is found to have an issue, and kind of what happened to those raw materials, or what happened to those products as they were blended, baked, manufactured, distributed into other products. Again, I think that the key to that is being able to leverage this new world of IoT and this new world of data collection to identify at the most granular level that you can product that is going into the manufacturing process. So if I do identify an issue, that I can quickly identify where that product went, so that I can, I don't want to say potentially limit the scope of a recall, but quickly identify, what finished goods batches that affected, where they went, and remediate that back to the source, because we all, have read the, the stories and heard the, the newscast, that, we pulled all the romaine lettuce off of the shelf, but it was, some other vegetable that actually caused, an issue, right? And, how can you quickly identify at the earliest possible point, where product is coming from, be able to source that information quickly within an integrated system. And again, that's one of the keys, is that I need to be able to integrate my data collection traceability system into my ERP or business systems, so that I can understand if an order went out, or if there was a manufacturing order that leveraged this raw material, how do I quickly tie that traceability together? Because as I mentioned earlier, a disconnected system, is sometimes as bad as having no system at all, because of the amount of manual processing and labor it takes to tie all those pieces together. So, it's a complex question, but I do think that there are, mitigation ways that we can evolve to do that level of traceability.
Okay, thank you. Another question we received is the FDA seems to think that blockchain will solve a lot of these problems. What are your thoughts on that?
I think blockchain is an interesting technology. I've had some, I don't know if they're controversial or not, thoughts around blockchain. I think blockchain is a tool, right? And I think blockchain, certainly, having an immutable ledger that you can put additional pieces of information on and trace that through the supply chain is a fantastic use of technology. I don't think it's a panacea. I also don't think everything needs to be on a blockchain. I think there can be, blockchain transactions which are supported by additional track and trace functionality. There are limitations to blockchain that will be overcome over time. The thing, and it goes back a little bit to, what I mentioned, earlier is, how do we make sure that the technology is available to everyone? And as blockchain evolves and becomes more ubiquitous in the supply chain, I do think it's a very viable tool, and we will see, a greater use of it. But it is just that. It is a part of a tool set that will help you track and trace product, kind of through your supply chain, in addition to your classic business ERP systems, in addition to serialization and unique identification systems, in addition to product marking, and the ability to capture and disseminate information via various means. So don't drop your view of blockchain at all. It's going to be a part of the solution, but it's not going to be the solution.
Okay, thank you. It has been said that the blueprint is a fluid document. How does a company work with a living document like this to deal with the potential volatility?
Yeah, great question. I think that I think if it wasn't a fluid document, then we would know all the answers, which I don't think that we do. I think that what you do with a document like this is you look at the tenets of the document, you look at the pillars of the document, you look at your own capabilities as a company and your partner's capabilities, and you start to work towards that the essence of what's in the document. I would be surprised if anyone ever came out with, here's the definitive way that the industry is going to work, end to end, and this is the way that we will all do it. I think you take the concepts of the document, I think you work with your solutions providers and, industry leaders to apply that to your business. And then you also take a look at what technology you have today, what your technology investment is going to look like over time. And then again, your partner ecosystem to see how many of those pillars or how many of those tenets you can start to incorporate into your traceability solution, because my opinion is, quite honestly, you can't go wrong with the high level view that they have put out and starting to distill those down into actual practices that you put into your business.
Okay, thank you for that, John. That'll wrap up our question and answer session here. You can always reach out to us if you have a question that we did not answer on today's call. One last thing before we go to, this has been recorded, and when the recording is available to view, I will email all the registrants of today's webinar. I had that question a couple times, so just wanted to address that real quick. John, thank you so much for your time and your insights today. Appreciate it.
Yes, and thank you everyone for joining, and everyone please be safe and enjoy the rest of your day.